Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a dusty, smoky Civil War camp where supper crunches back. You're hunched beside a campfire staring down at a puck-sized cracker that's so hard you're pretty sure it could kill a man if thrown. Around you, the men chew slowly, jaw muscles straining occasionally, spitting out a pebble. Or was that a weevil? No matter. This is hardtack, your dinner, your breakfast, and possibly your dentist's retirement plan. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. But what did Civil War soldiers actually put in their mouths day after day just to survive? Hardtack, sometimes lovingly referred to as tooth dullers, or sheet iron by the Union, and Confederate soldiers, was the backbone of Civil War rations. Made from flour and water, it was baked until nearly fossilized. You're sitting there, trying to soak it in coffee to soften it, while the guy next to you pulls out a bullet and starts chiseling the biscuit, like he's excavating a fossil. When the war began, the U.S. Army had little interest in providing fine cuisine. Rations were designed for transportability and shelf life, not pleasure. Hardtack could last months, years, even without spoiling, which is a little unsettling, considering that mold and worms sometimes beat the expiration date to the finish line. You're not surprised when you bite in and feel a tiny crunch that definitely wasn't from the flour. Soldiers joked that you had to crack it open like a geode and shake out the bugs before eating. There are stories, probably exaggerated, but not entirely untrue, of biscuits infested with larvae, maggots, and beetles. But hey, extra protein, right? Now, imagine trying to eat that 3 times a day, every day on the march. There's no jam, no butter, no gravy boat in sight. Sometimes you'd soften it in your soup or coffee. Sometimes you just gnawed on it until your gums bled. And if you ran out of hardtack, you might just thank the heavens for the break. Historians still argue whether hardtack was deliberately baked this hard, or if supply depots simply didn't care. Some suspect it was meant to be softened, always never crunched raw. But letters and diaries reveal a grim delight in mocking its durability. A soldier from the 5th Ohio Infantry once wrote, "A cannonball won't crack it unless it's already got a split." In truth, you could measure the supply quality of a regiment by how loudly they chewed. And when the hardtack did arrive, sometimes it was already stale, wrapped in barrels, reused from pickles, or nails adding just a little seasoning to the mix. By the way, if you were in the Confederate ranks, you might have had even less to crunch. Cornbread was more common in the South, but we'll get to that. For now, just picture yourself by that fire, hardtack, and hand teeth aching already, and the sergeant calling you to move out before you finish the second chew. And no, there's no second course. Now, let's talk about the one addiction that fueled the Union Army more than gunpowder. You barely managed to chip your way through the hardtack before dawn broke, but now you're craving something, anything to wake you up. That's when the smell hits you. Acrid, earthy, and strangely comforting coffee. Yes, actual coffee percolating in a battered tin pot that's blackened with years of soot and singed fingers. You shuffle closer, because in this camp, a cup of bitter brew is more than caffeine, it's communion. Union soldiers were obsessed with coffee, seriously obsessed. They drank it morning, noon, and night, and when beans ran low, They boiled burnt crusts of hardtack or roasted chicory as desperate substitutes. Imagine a military campaign powered not by strategy, but by boiling pots on every fire pit. Some men even roasted green beans in their rifle pans, grinding them with rocks and stirring with bayonets. You'd do the same anything for that warm, smoky sip that reminds you of home and keeps your eyelids from collapsing during the 3 a.m. watch. The government issued beans by the sackful to northern troops. They weren't pre-ground, which meant grinding was a camp ritual, someone pounding beans with a musket butt, while another watched for picket duty. It wasn't just sustenance, it was ritual morale, and maybe even a mild form of therapy. Historians still argue whether coffee was deliberately emphasized in ration planning to boost morale, or if it simply became a soldier's addiction by default. Whatever the reason, there's no denying its role. Diaries overflow with references to blessed coffee and the nectar of the campaign. One Union soldier even wrote that he'd rather go without ammunition than miss his morning brew. That's dedication, or a full-blown dependency. Meanwhile, Confederate soldiers were left to improvise. The Union blockade cut off coffee imports to the South, so soldiers boiled dandelion roots, acorns, cornmeal, and even sweet potatoes in a tragic attempt to replicate the taste. You try sipping a mug of that. It's like drinking betrayal with a hint of soil. But back on the Union side, there were times when coffee was prepared under cannon fire. No joke. Men boiled their morning rations in their tin cups, while bullets hissed overhead. There are battlefield accounts of soldiers lying on their stomachs during firefights, shielding their tin mugs like sacred relics. And in some cases, they'd rather go without boots than give up their coffee kit. Of course, there was always that one guy in the unit who somehow brewed a better cup, some magic combination of bean boil and bravado. You'd find yourself wandering to his fire pit just to swap gossip and steal a sip. Maybe you'd trade your last sugar ration or a stick of tobacco for one hot, slightly metallic cup. Priorities. And when night fell and the stars peeked through cannon smoke, coffee became something more than a stimulant. It was comfort in a cup. The rattle of tin spoons against metal mugs, the hiss of water boiling over flame, and the deep communal sigh that followed a long sip. This was the sound of survival. So tonight, as you cradle that cup and warm your fingers by the flame, you're not just staying awake. You're staying alive awake, and vaguely caffeinated, ready to face another day of bad biscuits and worse odds. Hungry, yet let's see what they called the main course, though your stomach might disagree. It's midday now, and your stomach's making threats. Coffee's worn off, and the fire's burned low. Time for the main course. You dig through your knapsack, avoiding the damp socks and letters from home, and pull out a sack of meat. Or at least something once resembling meat. It's salt pork, briny rubbery, and veined with fat, and it smells like ocean regret. Salt pork was a ration staple, especially for Union troops. It was often so heavily salted that you'd have to boil it twice just to make it chewable. And even then, your jaw might give out before the meat did. You drop it in a tin pot with some water and maybe a scrap of onion if you've been lucky lately. The pot hisses. The fat rises. You stir cautiously hopeful. Occasionally, you'd be issued fresh meat. Emphasis on occasionally, but fresh didn't always mean not dangerous. Supply wagons took days to arrive, especially in southern heat. Soldiers often joked that their beef marched behind the army for a week before finally giving up and dying. Then it was served, and then there were the desiccated vegetables. a kind of powdered, sun-dried stew brick that promised the illusion of nutrition. You'd rehydrate it in your tin and watch a mushy, multicolored sludge emerge. You'd taste something vaguely like carrot. Maybe historians still argue whether desiccated vegetables offered any real benefit or were simply a placebo served up in squares. Soldiers referred to them as compressed agony. You remember reading the joke scrawled on the latrine wall: desiccated vegetables, the only food that looks the same, going in and coming out. As you chew the leathery pork, a fellow soldier next to you swears he once found a bullet in his ration left over from the butcher's work, or maybe a previous customer. Either way, it's not encouraging. Some guys would trade 2 portions of pork for just 1 tin of beans. Others would rather go hungry. Down south, Confederate soldiers weren't so lucky. Salt pork was scarcer, and what they got was often rancid. Instead, they leaned on bacon grease and wild game if they were lucky enough to catch any. Otherwise, it was cornmeal cakes and boiled roots again and again. On good days, there was slush, a grayish fat, skimmed off boiled pork, saved and repurposed as cooking grease or smeared on hardtack to simulate flavor. Yes, this was considered good, and if that doesn't turn your stomach, try this. Soldiers sometimes used the salted meat brine to pickle everything from onions to eggs to, well, anything not nailed down. Preservation over pleasure always. Despite its texture and taste, or lack thereof, salt pork was life. You'd chew it slowly, looking out over the field, thinking about the last time you had real food, like roast chicken or apple pie. Sometimes you'd close your eyes and pretend the pork was something else. A thick steak, a lamb chop, a mistake you didn't have to eat. But you keep chewing because you have to, because battles don't wait for better meals, and because in this war, survival comes heavily salted and questionably aged. But what happens when even salt pork runs out? That's when the rules and the menu get rewritten. The salt pork is gone, leaving behind a mouthful of salt and regret. But your stomach's still whispering threats. That's when the foraging begins. You sling your rifle over your shoulder and wander beyond the camp's edge eyes, scanning the underbrush for anything remotely edible. You're not alone. Half the regiment seems to have had the same idea. Foraging, officially frowned upon, was practically policy. Commanders issued stern warnings, but everyone knew survival meant bending the rules. You're not stealing, you tell yourself. You're requisitioning from the countryside. That wild onion patch, a gift from nature. Those apples in that unguarded orchard, an opportunity. You spot a few berries, maybe some dandelion greens. Nothing hearty, but it's a start. Then someone nearby spots a chicken. It squawks. A chase ensues. 3 grown men scrambling through the mud after a panicked hen. It's almost funny until one of them pulls a boot knife and ends it. Dinner secured. Back at camp, that chicken becomes stew, or something stew adjacent. The onion greens go in along with a piece of hardtack to thicken it. Someone throws in a pinch of salt pork fat. The resulting dish is bland gray and smells faintly like wet leaves, but it's hot and it's food. Union troops, especially those on the march, often relied on foraging when supply lines faltered. Confederate soldiers, with even thinner supply chains, made it a daily necessity. You'd hunt small game squirrels, raccoons, even possums. Some men roasted songbirds on skewers or made soup out of frogs. You never thought you'd eat a tree frog, but here you are. Historians still argue whether foraging helped or hurt the war effort. Some believe it relieved strain on supply wagons. Others point to the animosity it caused with local civilians, especially in the South, where Union foraging often blurred into looting. It's complicated. So are your feelings as you bite into stolen apples. Then there was bushwhacking, a term used when soldiers went beyond foraging and into flat-out theft. Chickens were taken from coops bred, from windowsills, pies from under cooling cloths. Entire pantries disappeared. One soldier joked that Johnny Reb never feared our rifles, he feared our stomachs. You knew guys who got creative. One soldier carried a fishing hook and line sneaking off to streams between marches. Another smuggled salt and pepper in a tobacco pouch. You're thinking of making a stew with that turnip you spotted earlier, if someone else hasn't nabbed it already. Still, there's a strange camaraderie in foraging. You bond over stolen eggs, compare finds like trophies. Once your friend swapped a rabbit for a pair of clean socks. Another time, a single onion fetched a whole tin of sardines. And if you foraged nothing, well then, it's another night of dreams about cornbread and molasses, while your belly murmurs war songs. Evening falls with a thud, and your stomach hasn't gotten the message that dinner's canceled. You're crouched near the fire staring at your boots. No, not because they're stylish, but because in times of dire hunger, soldiers have been known to eat them. Yes, really. Boiling boots wasn't some wartime myth. It was a grim reality during long sieges and starved marches. Made from rawhide and treated leather boots became an emergency ration when no other options remained. You'd boil them for hours, scraping off polished mud and whatever had attached itself during the last campaign. Then with luck, you'd extract a semi-edible leather stew, stringy, greasy, and vaguely horrific. You haven't reached that point yet, but you've heard the stories. Vicksburg, Petersburg, prison camps where desperate men gnawed on shoe soles like jerky. The smell alone could peel paint from a barn. Still, when hunger wraps its fingers around your ribs, desperation overrules dignity. Historians still argue whether boot eating was widespread or rare, but documented letters and prisoner accounts don't lie. Confederate soldiers, particularly in the war's final years, were pushed to extremes. One diary entry from a Southern prisoner spoke of slicing boot tongues, thin boiling them thrice and chewing them like tough bacon. He added better than nothing, but not by much. Sometimes, soldiers removed the metal bits, nails, eyelets, buckles before boiling. Sometimes they didn't. More than one jaw cracked on an unnoticed tack. You wonder if you'd bother removing yours. Might add crunch. Then there were the belts, saddlebags, scabbards. Anything made of leather was fair game in a pinch. Just soak it, long enough scrape off the grime, and stew away. Soldiers joked that the Union had hardtack, the Confederacy had hard boot. You glance down at your own boots. They've marched through mudblood and worse. They smell like history and failure. But you can't help but wonder if things get bad enough, how long will you resist? And no, the soles don't taste like chicken. This morning breakfast is a crumbly dry wedge of cornmeal cake wrapped in a stained cloth. You pick at the edge, feeling the grit between your fingers like sand with ambition. If you're a Confederate soldier, this is your mainstay cornbread in every shape, every meal, and every possible variation that still technically counts as food. Cornmeal was the Southern Army's lifeline. With wheat harder to come by and the Union blockades throttling supply lines, the South leaned heavily on maize. Every family, every farm, Every camp cooked with it. You eat it, plain baked fried, even dissolved in water, and gulped down as a gritty slurry called goober gruel. It's filling, if not exactly thrilling. The standard version, Johnny Cake's flat cornmeal patties sometimes cooked on a rock, sometimes pan-fried in bacon grease if you're blessed. Others preferred spoon-bread mush or ash cakes, which were quite literally cakes baked in ash. You've probably done this once already, brushing away the embers to retrieve something that looks like it was born in a chimney. Historians still argue whether the South's reliance on cornmeal helped stretch their endurance or slowly wore down morale. There's no question it kept men alive, but at what cost to spirit and strength? Letters home describe meals so dull, even the crows turned away. And yet every soldier could prepare it with his eyes closed often, because he was half asleep when cooking. You remember one officer who tried to spice things up with bits of wild onion and squirrel meat. Another poured molasses over his cake when he could steal a drop. But most days, it's just meal water, a pinch of salt if you're lucky, and maybe a prayer. Southern soldiers even joked that they were made of corn. "I piss cornmeal," one wrote. "I dream of cornbread. I fight for grits." It was part of life, part of suffering, and part of the identity forged by necessity. You glance across the campfire. One soldier stirs a tin pot filled with mush, rhythmically tapping the side with a spoon like he's coaxing flavor into it. Another breaks off a wedge and shares it wordlessly. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was communion. And when the food was scarce or bland, the act of sharing became its own kind of feast. So you chew slowly, the crumbs sticking to your lips, your breath catching in a dry cough. There's no butter, no syrup, no roast pork. Just the silence of the woods, the crackle of fire, and the soft crunch of a cake made from desperation. You've just finished another dry cornmeal cake when your stomach turns not from hunger, but from whatever that was you ate last night. It could have been the pork. Or maybe that apple that looked fine until you saw the worm waving goodbye halfway through the bite. Either way, your gut is staging a mutiny. Spoiled rations weren't the exception, they were the routine. Barrels of meat arrived teeming with maggots. Bread crumbled into powder, or worse, sprouted fuzzy gray spots. One time, you opened a sack of rice and outpoured an entire ecosystem bug's mold, and what might have been a very determined beetle colony. You ate it anyway. The lack of refrigeration combined with glacially slow supply chains meant most food reached camps well past its prime. Soldiers knew that the real enemy might not carry a musket, but rather squirm inside your dinner. You remember Private Weller, who proudly showed off a slab of beef so green it could have enlisted on its own. Aged like fine cheese, he joked right before disappearing into the woods with a panicked look and a canteen in hand. And then there's the dysentery, the uninvited guest at every meal. Water from creeks often carried disease, but when you're marching 12 miles a day and your water's been gone since sunrise, you'd drink anything. The latrines dug too shallow and too close to the camp didn't help. Neither did the fact that nobody really understood germs yet. Historians still argue whether more men died from disease than battle wounds because of bad rations or poor sanitation or both. But the statistics are brutal. In some regiments, diarrhea and dysentery were as common as breakfast and often more lethal. To cope, you start sniffing everything. Meat gets boiled twice. Bread gets scraped. And if it wriggles, you toast it. Fire kills worms right. You develop a sort of culinary sixth sense. That tin of beans you traded for last week. You passed it up this morning after noticing the lid bulged like a balloon. Another guy didn't. You haven't seen him since breakfast, but you keep eating. Because if you don't, weakness follows. And if weakness follows, you might not outrun the next cannonball, or worse, the next round of rations. Tonight, your belly grumbles in confusion. It's not hunger, it's protest. But you lie down anyway, hoping to sleep off whatever culinary sin you just committed, and praying it doesn't revisit you in the middle of the night. The next morning, you reach for your cooking gear. Not that it's much. Your entire kitchen fits inside a single mess kit: a shallow tin plate, a dented cup, and a long-handled spoon worn down by ash and elbow grease. Welcome to Soldier Cuisine, where every meal is prepared with creativity, desperation, and fire-blackened fingers. Your frying pan: a flattened coffee tin with a bent wire handle. Your spatula: a bayonet scrubbed clean and double-purposed. Over the months, you've become a culinary MacGyver, transforming battlefield scrap into passable cookware. One man in your regiment once grilled salt pork on a shovel. Another baked biscuits inside an empty ammunition crate, repurposed as a tiny oven. If it could hold heat and wasn't actively exploding, it was fair game. Cooking tools were highly prized and rarely uniform. Some soldiers received full issued kits with compartmentalized plates and cutlery. Most didn't. You might borrow a pot from your tent mate if you've got one generous enough not to trade it for tobacco. Otherwise, it's just you, a fire, and whatever metal object can survive direct flame. There was something endearing about these improvised setups. You'd see lines of tin cans sizzling on coals, each one labeled with chalk or scratched initials. A makeshift grill crafted from bent wire straddling two bricks. Someone stirs stew in a helmet. Another uses a rifle as a spit. You half expect someone to craft a whisk from bayonet shards. Historians still argue whether soldiers' improvisation in cooking equipment reflected resourcefulness or the sheer negligence of supply logistics. But there's no denying the ingenuity. Diaries often mention prized mess gear being polished, protected, and occasionally hidden from envious tentmates, and woe to the man who misplaced his tin cup. You'd see soldiers digging through mud, frantically retracing steps, like someone searching for a wedding ring. Coffee without a cup. That's enough to start a mutiny. You remember making your first rat trap: oven, 2 bricks, some foil, and a lot of wishful thinking. You burned the bottom of your cornbread, but the top came out edible. That counted as a win. Cooking it turned out became more than a survival task. It was ritual, a daily act of normalcy amid the madness. Sure, the utensils were crude and the food questionable, but when you stood there, spoon in hand, steam curling from a bubbling pot, you could almost pretend things were ordinary. And tonight, as you sit cross-legged by the fire blowing gently on your tin of slop, the glow of the embers reflects off your soot-streaked gear. It might not be a kitchen, but it's yours. It's midday, and you're sitting on an overturned crate, gently rotating a half-burnt corn cake on your tin plate, when a familiar scent wafts through the camp-fried bacon. Someone's managed to cook real meat. Your stomach lurches like it's trying to leap toward the smell, and your eyes start calculating. What can I trade? In Civil War camps, food wasn't just sustenance, it was currency. That lump of sugar in your pocket, worth a full day's rations if traded to the right man. A tin of coffee, practically gold. Soldiers bartered, constantly swapping food for tobacco clothing boots, or even chores. You've traded salt pork for clean socks. Once you saw a man give up his spare blanket for a slice of fried apple pie from someone's home parcel. No regrets, he said, just shivers. This bartering system thrived in both Union and Confederate ranks. Got beans. Someone wants them. Don't like your hardtack. Trade it to a guy with a stronger jaw and a sweet tooth for molasses. Rumors ran wild about soldiers smuggling food into camps, hidden in saddlebags or hollowed-out books. One guy even traded 2 chickens for a pocket knife, then sold the eggs and came out ahead. But the most surprising use of food bribery. You've seen prisoners grease the palms of guards with bacon fat and sweetened condensed milk. In one famously tragicomic case, a man bribed his way out of latrine duty with a fruitcake shipped from home. Even officers weren't immune, though their trades came in the form of extra whiskey or access to their better-stocked mess tents. Historians still argue whether these food exchanges boosted morale or created a dangerous class divide in the camps. Did it foster camaraderie or resentment? Probably both. But for you, it's survival economics at its grimiest. There's also the comfort factor. Meals shared in quiet moments often built stronger bonds than drills or victories. That guy who traded you corn cakes for dried apples. You still remember how you both sat under the same oak, chewing silently, pretending it was a real picnic. You almost laughed when he offered a toast with water from his dented canteen. Some soldiers went full entrepreneur. One soldier in your unit kept a canteen cafe, trading hot coffee and boiled mush to anyone willing to part with luxury goods. He called himself Chef General. You think he overcooked everything, but his rates were fair. You pull a scrap of bacon from your pouch and think, who needs this more, me or that guy with the sharp knife and the decent boots? Maybe you'll find out by sundown, because in this world, food speaks. Sometimes it whispers comfort. Sometimes it shouts power. Not all food came from rations or raids. Some came wrapped in love and brown paper. The mails come in. It's late as usual, but no one complains because the packages smell like home. You sort through the pile, fingers trembling a little, until you find it a small tin sealed with wax and wrapped in brown paper. Your name smudged, but legible. You pry it open and catch the scent, spices, sugar, and something else memory. Inside, there's cake. Real cake. Dense, maybe a little stale, but unmistakably sweet. You tear off a corner and close your eyes. It tastes like Christmas morning and your mother's old apron. Around you, the others crowd in. Some got cookies, others a slice of dried ham, or a pickle sealed in a jar. One guy grins as he unwraps a wedge of cheddar, lovingly packed in cloth and buttered to preserve it. You'd trade a boot for that cheese. Packages from home were lifelines, not just for food, but for morale. Mothers, wives, and sisters became experts in battlefield packaging. Fruitcake soaked in brandy lasted months. Gingerbread arrived wrapped in wax paper and prayers. Condensed milk tins came with hand-drawn hearts on the lid. Everything was treasured, every bite, every crumb. You'd see soldiers ration out a single fruit bar over 3 days. Others devoured everything the moment it arrived. You save a sliver for nightfall, because something about eating it under the stars makes the memory last longer. Some packages came with letters. Others were silent, just food lovingly prepared. One soldier told you he'd wept eating a biscuit his daughter had helped bake. Tasted like tears, he said, but the good kind. Historians still argue whether these homemade parcels had a measurable effect on combat performance. But ask any soldier who received one, especially after weeks of spoiled rations and weevil-riddled bread, and they'll tell you It was the best thing they'd eaten in months. The Confederacy, under tighter blockade, saw fewer packages arrive. But when they did, they were treated like sacred artifacts. One man received a can of peaches, kissed the lid, and didn't open it for 2 weeks, just held it during roll call. Not everyone got mail. Some watched silently, eyes dark, pretending not to care. You knew better. Food meant someone still remembered you, still cared, still prayed. So tonight, you'll break off another bite of that cake saver, the cinnamon and nutmeg, and let it melt on your tongue like a whispered lullaby from miles away. You're sitting cross-legged in the dirt, gnawing on what might be your 5th cornmeal cake this week, when the officer's tent flap swings open and the aroma hits you. Roast meat, warm bread, even a whiff of something. Herbed. You glance down at your own mess, tin sigh, and return to chewing. In the Civil War, rank didn't just dictate orders, it dictated dinner. Officers almost always ate better. While you scraped the bottom of your tin for the last hint of flavor, they dined on items bought with private funds or shipped from home: tinned fruits, preserved meats, whiskey, fresh butter. If they were lucky or well-connected, they even had cooks. You've heard tales of officer spreads that included wine-stewed oysters and ham glazed in molasses. One captain, you recall, carried around a silver fork and napkin. He once offered you a raisin. Just one. You still remember it. This culinary caste system was quietly accepted. Officers argued they needed the strength to lead. You figured they needed the calories to lift their egos. Either way, the difference was undeniable. In some units, the officers' meals were completely separate, served on actual plates with cutlery. You once glimpsed a real china cup briefly, before it was knocked over and shattered by a stray elbow. Historians still argue whether these privileges fostered resentment or simply reflected social norms of the era. One diary described a lieutenant dining on duck, while enlisted men boiled moldy beans in a tin pail a few feet away. No one complained. Much. But the grumbling, you suspect, was constant and contagious. Occasionally, there were exceptions. Some officers insisted on eating with their men. One colonel you knew refused to touch his private rations unless everyone had something warm. He wasn't popular with command, but he was beloved by the troops. Still, for most, the divide was real. Officers had access to commissary stores, local purchases, and the best cuts of any distributed meat. You had what you could trade for. And so, the tent line became a food chain, with you on the foraging end. Once during a lull, an officer's aide offered you leftover pudding. You almost cried. It was cold, soft, and too sweet, but you savored every bite. Later, you learned it was made with imported sugar and eggs. You didn't care. It was warm kindness in edible form. Tonight, the scent of baked beans with molasses drifts over again. You stir your ashes, press your corn cake a little flatter, and imagine for a moment what it must be like to have seconds. You've barely finished scraping your tin clean when the real treat makes the rounds, a swig of whiskey passed hand to hand in a dented flask. You take a sip, it burns, then warms. For a moment, it almost makes you forget the taste of cold fat and ash-baked corn cake. Almost. Alcohol was a constant companion in Civil War camps. Union troops often received whiskey or brandy rations, especially before battle or during winter months. Confederate access was more erratic, but when the booze flowed, spirits literally rose. Soldiers drank to forget to warm up to celebrate, or simply to dull the ache of endless fatigue. It wasn't always official. Much of it came through trade smuggled bottles or the occasional medicinal distribution from a sympathetic surgeon. But booze wasn't the only thing soldiers leaned on. Salt, yes, simple salt, was another obsession. Not just because it preserved food, but because a salty meal made a bad ration taste slightly better. You've seen men fight over a pinch of it. Others hid it in tobacco pouches or stitched it into shirt cuffs to avoid thieving hands. Then there was tobacco. Smoked, chewed, hoarded like treasure. It calmed nerves, gave you something to do with your mouth when food was scarce, and became a bartering gold mine. One pouch could buy you a week's worth of beans or a night's peace in the latrine line. Historians still argue whether these comfort substances did more harm than good. Whiskey dulled pain, but made men reckless. Tobacco steadied nerves, but chewed through morale when it ran out. And too much salt. Well, that didn't help your already stressed kidneys. You remember a friend, Tom, who once tried to distill his own moonshine from fermented apples and cornmeal. The result, a bubbling sludge that nearly blinded him. He called it victory fuel. You called it instant regret. Still, nothing could beat the comfort of a warm, smoky pipe after a freezing night patrol. That rhythmic puffing became a lullaby. Men sat in clusters, legs stretched passing pipes like hymns. In those moments, the war faded. The hunger paused. Some officers prohibited alcohol entirely. Others turned a blind eye. You heard rumors of an entire regiment raiding a sutler's wagon for bourbon. No one admitted it. Everyone slept better that night. Now, as you lean back against your knapsack, the flask comes around again. Another sip. Another grimace. But your limbs ease. Your breath slows. And for just a flicker, the war quiets. And when all the fires burn low, here's what remains. The fire's crackling low now, and someone's reciting a recipe not from a cookbook, but from memory, stitched together through desperation and a soldier's knack for invention. You lean in, because in this camp, even the worst dish has a story worth hearing. Tonight's menu, skilly-gaily. It's a classic among troops, a dish made by soaking hardtack in coffee or hot water, maybe tossing in some fried pork fat if available. It's mushy, warm, and vaguely edible. Some say it tastes better if you add sugar. You tried that once. It didn't help. Recipes passed from tent to tent, more oral tradition than culinary art. A slapjack was a basic cornmeal pancake pan-fried on whatever flat surface you had shovel bayonet or rock. Someone once served you one with bits of squirrel in it. You didn't ask questions. Another favorite lobscouse. It was stew-like, made with salted beef, hardtack crumbs, maybe some dried vegetables if someone got a care package. You remember a guy in your regiment who swore by adding a pinch of gunpowder. For zest, he said. You passed. Historians still argue whether these dishes were true recipes or just survival mashups. But soldiers took pride in their creations. A well-cooked camp cobbler made from dried apples and scorched sugar could bring real joy to a row of weary men. Even burnt bacon could become a delicacy if you hadn't tasted it in weeks. You once watched a man attempt a biscuit using only flour, salt, and rainwater. He baked it on a slate stone, flipped it with his bayonet, and beamed with pride when it didn't crumble to dust. You clapped. Everyone clapped. In war, small victories matter. There was even a dessert of sorts. Fried hardtack soaked in molasses. One soldier called it hardtack flambe. Another called it last rites on a plate. These weren't meals. They were morale. The act of preparing even poorly reminded you of home. You'd swap recipes between watch rotations, argue about the best way to rehydrate beans, or boast about a secret spice, which usually turned out to be just ash. Once during a lull, your camp held a cooking contest. The prize, a pair of dry socks. The winning dish was a stew made of beef scraps, boiled potato skins, and stolen onion greens. You still think about it. Now, you scrape your tin clean, already wondering what tomorrow's recipe will be. Whatever it is, it won't taste good, but it'll taste like survival. You wake up to the distant thud of cannon fire and the even more immediate ache of an empty stomach. Rations are gone. Foraging has yielded nothing but a bitter root someone swore was edible if desperate. Desperate has arrived. Food shortages weren't occasional, they were endemic. Marches stretched across states. Supply wagons got stuck in the mud, ambushed, or simply didn't exist. Soldiers went days with only a crust of bread, gnawing on it like it might reveal a hidden layer. During sieges like those at Vicksburg or Petersburg, hunger turned camps into powder kegs. Confederate lines in particular withered under weeks without resupply. You remember a friend who boiled shoe leather again, and another who wept openly over the final spoonful of cornmeal. When rations failed entirely, tempers frayed. Fistfights broke out over crumbs. Officers had to guard remaining supplies with armed pickets. In rare cases, food riots erupted small, chaotic bursts of rage and starvation. One camp of Confederate soldiers broke into a supply tent, stripping it clean in minutes. The next morning, there was nothing left but footprints and a broken jar of mustard. Historians still argue whether these food riots were acts of rebellion or sheer survival instinct. Either way, they reveal the raw edge of war, not the glory, but the gnawing. The quiet madness that sets in when hunger becomes constant background noise. Then there were the marches, endless, foot-blistering hauls across fields, forests, and rivers, often with empty bellies. You remember staggering up a ridge, dizzy with heat and hunger, chewing the inside of your cheek to forget the ache in your gut. One man passed out. Another simply sat down and refused to move. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. They left him. To stave off collapse, some units issued emergency rations, hard sugar bricks, parched corn, or whatever could be spared. You heard about a soldier who carried an emergency potato wrapped in cloth. He talked to it, never ate it. You understood. At night, the campfires were quieter, less laughter, less clatter of mess kits. Men chewed slowly if they chewed at all. Others lay in their tents, whispering menus, from memory roast chicken peach pie, buttermilk biscuits. You find yourself doing the same now, listing meals like spells, hoping one might summon something real. But all you have is a piece of dried apple cracked and shriveled tucked into your boot days ago. You eat it without tasting. Then you close your eyes, stomach still growling, and wait for morning. Another march. Another scavenge. Another fight. Not with bullets, but with hunger. The fire tonight burns low and quiet. You sit shoulder to shoulder, with the others, steam rising from the pot in slow, lazy tendrils. Tonight's dinner beans. Not great, but not bad. They're soft, warm, and most importantly, they're here. You eat slowly, spoonful by spoonful, because this may be your last real meal for days. There's a strange calm before battle. Everything feels slowed down, like the war's holding its breath. Soldiers spend these moments checking gear writing letters, polishing boots they might not wear again. But they also eat, Because tomorrow there may not be time. You glance around. One man's singing softly as he stirs a pot. Another's passing out crumbled biscuits from a waxed paper packet labeled from home. Someone offers a lump of molasses-smeared cornmeal on a tin plate. No one speaks much. The food does the talking. The meal is modest, but sacred. Shared beans, maybe some fried salt pork, and coffee thick as tar. You sip it with both hands like it's sacred. In a way, it is. For a moment, you're not thinking about rifles or formations. You're just eating with friends, some of whom might not be sitting here tomorrow. Historians still argue whether soldiers' final meals before battles had any nutritional value or were more about ritual and morale. You'd say both. Something in your gut settles when you eat next to a fire surrounded by your brothers in arms. Even if it's just beans, the act says, we are still here. We are still human. You remember a lieutenant who always toasted with his tin cup before a fight. To supper, he'd say, and to breakfast, if we're lucky. It became tradition. Tonight you echo it softly, raising your dented mug. A few others join in. To supper, someone mutters, then silence. You lie down the fire, dimming to embers. Your belly isn't full, but it's satisfied. Your mind, just for now, is quiet. And somewhere, in that haze of smoke and night, you feel almost at peace. The flames flicker softly, casting golden halos on soot-streaked faces. Smoke drifts lazily upward as boots scrape against gravel, and canvas coats shift in the night breeze. It's a quiet moment in a loud world, one carved from exhaustion, hope, and just a bit of stolen peace. You'd think war would harden everyone into stone, but no. Around these fires, something surprisingly soft begins to glow. A tin cup passes hands. Someone strikes up a tune with a harmonica, missing a few notes. Another leans in with a smirk and a story you've already heard 10 times. But tonight, that's exactly what you need. In these late-night circles, the war momentarily recedes, like mist rolling off a field. You're not just fighting for territory anymore. You're fighting to feel human. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this little campfire stretches. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle closer to the fire, careful not to kick up the ash. Someone's brought over a small log, and you perch on it, with your knees pulled in a habit everyone's adopted to make space. The circle isn't always complete. Sometimes a friend's missing because of patrol, or because they're gone for good. But still, there's an invisible glue here, a nightly ritual as unspoken as it is sacred. The guy across from you, Pappy, is older than most, maybe 30. He's stitching up his sock for the 4th time and humming a tune his grandmother taught him. Nobody tells him to stop. It's these odd, unintentional performances that fill the space between battle and sleep. The wood pops again. Someone's thrown in a damp branch. It smells like pine sap and mold. You can't help but lean into the heat. Around you, the talk starts as it always does. Slow, soft, then spiraling into pockets of laughter, groans, or quiet nods. Stories of home take center stage. Little things like what Ma used to cook on Sundays, or how your baby sister just got her front teeth. There's comfort in this repetition. It's not the novelty of the tale that matters, it's the telling. You know how the punchline goes, but you let your buddy say it anyway. It's the same reason people rewatch movies or reread letters. Some moments are worth looping. Historically, these fire circles weren't just about warmth, they were emotional engines. Soldiers wrote journals describing how these gatherings were where sanity got patched together with tobacco and teasing. The Union and Confederate armies had vastly different command structures, but in both these late-night sessions functioned as a kind of emotional decompression chamber. Fringe records even mention impromptu therapy moments, guys confessing fears or heartbreaks under starlight, something that wouldn't happen in daylight. One account from a Pennsylvania regiment notes a soldier named Reuben who recited psalms every night in German. His voice was so calming, the others swore it cured insomnia. Of course, not everyone opened up. Some just sat and listened, eyes, glassy fingers twisting a scrap of cloth or wood. Historians still argue whether these circles were truly democratic or if certain personalities dominated. But one thing's clear, they mattered. In the dim circle, a private knew, judging by his stiff posture, tries to join in. He's clutching a biscuit like it's his last anchor. No one says much, but one guy nudges the coffee pot toward him, and that's the welcome he needs. You remember being that kid. You remember worse. You glance up. The stars are out in full, scattered across the sky like grains of spilled flour. There's something deeply strange about watching the heavens while your boots are planted in mud. Philosophical, maybe. Or just exhausted. A horse whinnies in the distance. Someone mutters about tomorrow's march. But for now, this is your world, 15 souls, and a fire. You can tell when the mail arrives. It's not announced with trumpets or shouting, but with a sudden charge of electricity through camp. Men look up from whatever they're doing, digging, dozing, darning socks, and stand as if tugged by invisible strings. You find yourself doing the same heart pacing, faster than your steps, because tonight there might be a letter, and a letter in this place is oxygen. Camp letters are never just paper. They're pocket-sized time machines wrapping you in the smells, voices, and comforts of a world that now feels like myth. They come folded and smudged sometimes with dirt from a 100-mile journey, sometimes tinged with perfume so faint you doubt it was ever there. But you sniff anyway, just in case. Some are full of detail, what the cow gave this week, who married whom, what the preacher said last Sunday. Others are just a few lines, "We are all well, hope you are too." But even that matters. It's proof someone remembered you. Proof someone cares whether you wake up tomorrow. You settle down on your blanket and unfold your latest one. It's from your sister, full of her usual exasperation. "Mama says I have to write to you before I can go to the fair. So here." You grin, and it feels like someone lit a lantern in your chest. The letter goes on about some boy named Samuel who smells like turnips and won't stop staring at her in church. You laugh aloud, and two guys next to you glance over hopeful. Not everyone gets mail. Some haven't heard from home in months. Some not at all. A few have no home left to write. From burned-out towns, families scattered, or silence too painful to bridge. For them, your letter is both blessing and curse. They're happy for you, but their hands twitch when they see the envelope and they suddenly find something else to do. Letters often get passed around. Not read aloud, not yet, that's later. But touched, commented on, admired like sacred relics. That handwriting, that's a lady's. That's some fine parchment, your folks got money. You never mind. Their teasing means they're still invested. Officially, the Union Postal Service worked hard to keep up with soldier correspondents, mail couriers, even risked fire zones to deliver. The Confederacy, under tighter blockade conditions, sometimes relied on volunteers or smugglers. Still, historians argue how reliable either system was. Entire units might get nothing for weeks. Then a flood of letters all at once wrapped in string and carried by one overburdened muddy man with a mule that hated mud. There's a fringe anecdote about a postal runner named Gus who trained a raccoon to sniff out his unit's scent. Supposedly, he'd release the creature with a satchel strapped on its back, and it would scamper toward the right tent. There's zero proof, of course, but everyone wants it to be true. Most letters are read once, with shaking hands again, with slower breath, and a third time late at night, when it's too dark to see, but you know the words by heart. Some guys tuck them into their boots, close to the skin. Others sleep with them under their heads like little paper pillows. And then there are the ones who read their letters aloud. The next section. That's where it gets real. The voice cuts through the evening hum, low, steady, and slightly nasal. Dear son, we hope this letter finds you in good spirits. Around the fire, you and the others fall quiet. It's not the first time someone's read a letter out loud, and it won't be the last. But each time, it feels sacred, like someone's peeling open their chest and letting the rest of you peek in. The reader is always someone confident enough to keep from choking up or good at pretending. Tonight, it's Hawkins, the wiry kid, with two front teeth too big for his mouth. He holds the folded paper like a sermon and sways as he reads. His accent pulls certain words longer than others, and every now and then he squints like the handwriting is wrestling with him. The letter's simple. A mother thanking God he's alive, telling him the neighbor's cow had triplets, and asking whether he still likes blackberry jam. A couple of guys chuckle at that last part. One nudges you and mutters, "I'd kill for a spoonful of jam right now." You smile, but don't reply, too caught up in Hawkins' voice, which has softened. What's strange is how public these private words become. You might think no one would share something so personal, but out here, vulnerability is currency. When someone reads their letter aloud, it becomes group property, not to dissect, but to feel together. Even the tough ones, the ones with bad news, get read sometimes. One night, a man read a letter telling him his brother had died of pneumonia. No one laughed. No one moved. They just sat with him silently until the fire burned low. There's always one guy who tries to lighten the mood. Tonight, it's Givens who pipes up after the reading. "Tell your ma, if she's got extra jam, I'll marry her." The group erupts in tired laughter, and the spell breaks, but not entirely. Historians note that reading aloud was both a bonding act and a practical one. Many soldiers were semi-literate or illiterate, especially among Confederate ranks, where rural schooling was scarce. So those who could read became the voices of others. One private in a Georgia regiment was known to read 5 or 6 letters a night, not his, but those entrusted to him. He'd read with a flair worthy of theater-making mothers' updates sound like Shakespeare. There's still debate among scholars about how this public sharing affected morale. Did it bring people closer or blur emotional boundaries? Either way, it was common and deeply human. Fringe stories tell of soldiers who memorized letters so completely they'd recite them from heart after the paper disintegrated. One man even tattooed his fiance's entire letter down his arm in tiny shaky lines. Whether it's true or not, you want to believe it. Tonight, Hawkins finishes the letter and folds it slowly, like bedding down a baby bird. No applause, no comments, just the crackle of the fire and the occasional sniff from someone pretending to have smoke in his eye. You lean back, Feel the hard earth under your spine and stare at the stars. For a moment, it feels like the war is elsewhere, far beyond this circle of quiet voices and burning wood. Dear Mother, it always begins. 2 words that carry more weight than any cannon or rifle in camp. You've seen a dozen letters start that way, on crumpled envelopes, scraps of ledger paper, even the back of an old supply list. It doesn't matter what follows. The very act of writing those words is like whispering a prayer into enemy territory. You sit with a piece of charcoal and torn paper in your lap, trying to do the same. Dear Mother, you write, and then stop. What do you even say? That your socks rotted last week, that the stew was mostly boot leather, that you haven't slept more than 3 hours in a row since last Tuesday. You stare at the page, and it stares back. Around you, others are doing the same. Some write quickly, like the words are trying to escape them. Others chew their pencils like cud lost in thought. You catch a glance at someone's page. I am well, it says, even though he coughed blood this morning. That's the game you protect them from the worst parts of your reality. Most letters follow a rhythm: polite opening firm, reassurances, tiny domestic questions that tether you to something better. How is the corn this year? Is the cat still scratching the couch? Tell Eliza not to marry that fool until I get back. And always, always, I miss you more than words can say. There's an oddly soothing monotony to these lines. Historians suggest that the repetition was intentional soldiers crafting emotional camouflage as much for themselves as for their families. It's easier to cope if you pretend this is all temporary, that there's still a life waiting for you on the other side of the rifle smoke. What's striking is how similar the letters are: Union or Confederate farm boy or city clerk. They all bleed the same quiet ache. A researcher once compared dozens of Civil War letters and found recurring phrases: I think of you every night, I hope this war ends soon, tell the children I love them. It's as if every soldier was pulling from a shared emotional script. Yet there are also subtle personal touches. One man included a drawing of his dog, complete with labels for each paw. Another wrote in verse, ending each paragraph with a rhyme. One soldier, clearly frustrated, wrote, Ma stopped sending me mittens. I have 7 pairs now. Please send cheese. You can't blame him. Still, writing home wasn't easy. Paper was scarce, ink even more so. Some used berry juice soot mixed with water, or borrowed writing tools when they could. One fringe case tells of a man who carved his letter into a piece of bark and mailed it like that. Apparently, it made it to Missouri. The opening: Dear Mother wasn't always literal. Some men addressed wives, sisters, even neighbors, who acted like surrogate family. But Mother remained the emotional North Star, a symbol of nurture, safety, and unconditional love. There's a quiet ritual to it. You write the letter, fold it carefully, and tuck it into your coat pocket, hoping the next courier actually makes it. You might not ever know if it arrives, but writing it somehow still makes you feel a little more whole. You look back at your page. Dear Mother, you whisper and start again. The mail didn't come today. Again. You try not to show it, but it lands like a blow to the ribs. For the 5th night in a row, there's no letter for you. You loiter around the campfire, pretending to fiddle with your blanket, hoping no one notices the tiny wilt in your shoulders. But of course they do. Everyone knows the look of a man waiting for mail that never arrives. It's a strange kind of ache. Not sharp, just sinking. Like you're slowly being erased from someone else's world. Maybe your sister's busy. Maybe your sweetheart is sick. Maybe your best friend back home finally got tired of writing. Or maybe nothing's wrong, and the letter's just stuck somewhere in a muddy postal bag chewed on by a possum outside Chattanooga. You tell yourself that. You tell yourself that a lot. Other men have their own routines for coping. Some curse aloud, declaring the whole postal system a fraud. Some fake getting mail just to save face holding an old envelope like it's new eyes scanning a blank sheet with studied intensity. You've seen it happen. You've done it yourself. There's a guy in your unit named Calhoun who hasn't had a letter in months. He claims his entire family is allergic to writing, which gets a chuckle, but his voice always tightens around the joke. Another fella keeps every letter he ever got, and on mailless nights, he rereads them all in a row, like stacking firewood against the cold. Historians have long debated how mail frequency affected soldier morale. Some argue it was the single most important factor in psychological endurance, more than food boots or even rank. Others suggest that absence of letters led to dangerous behavior, desertion depression, or picking fights just to feel something. What's certain is that soldiers without letters often became ghosts in the camp, quiet, distracted, brittle. There's a fringe tale about a soldier named Ellis who started writing letters to himself, complete with fake names and stories about an imaginary wife named Clara. He read them aloud like they were real. When asked, he simply said, "If no one's going to miss me, I may as well invent someone who does." No one laughed. They just let him keep reading. Tonight, someone else got a letter. You hear the crackle of fresh paper and the excited voice of a man trying not to sound too excited. You want to be happy for him, and part of you is, but another part wants to scream. To tear the air open and demand a word, just one from anyone who remembers you exist. You lie back, stare up at the canvas of stars, and wonder what your family is doing right now. Are they eating supper? Do they talk about you? Has your name grown soft with dust on their tongues? Tomorrow maybe the mail will come. Maybe. But tonight it didn't. The night's getting colder, but laughter cuts through like warm butter. Someone's just told a story about Private Hodges mistaking a skunk for a fallen comrade again, and the group loses it. Even you buried deep in your coat, and darker thoughts can't help but smirk. Campfire jokes are their own special brand of humor. They're not polished or clever. They rarely land with any precision, but they're ours. They're strung together from long hours of boredom, sudden bursts of terror, and way too many beans. The result? An endless supply of exaggerations, misheard orders, and outright nonsense delivered with deadpan sincerity. There's a rotating cast of comedians, most of whom have no idea they're funny. Like Perkins, who once swore that the Army only feeds you hardtack to keep you from running away too fast. Or Latimer, who claims to be the illegitimate son of Napoleon and backs it up with a thick French accent every time he drinks. You've heard these stories before, some of them a dozen times. The mule that kicked the general's tent flat. The time someone tried to boil socks for soup. The infamous latrine that was haunted. None of them are true, or maybe they are. Historians still argue whether the infamous butter candle tale, a prank involving a stick of butter, a match, and one very confused chaplain actually happened. Most agree it probably didn't. But everyone wants it to have happened. That's enough. Camp jokes are survival tools. You can only face so many death marches, bad stew, and sudden artillery blasts before something inside demands release. And humor is that release, bitter Absurd, sometimes disgusting, but deeply necessary. One fringe story from a Pennsylvania diary describes an entire battalion staging a mock trial for a chicken that kept stealing rations. The chicken was sentenced to stew and pardoned twice before disappearing. It was never clear if it had been eaten or simply escaped justice. Tonight, the joke of choice is about Sergeant Halverson and the legendary snake boots. Allegedly, he shot a snake, skinned it, and wore the skin as makeshift boot liners. The punchline: the boots hissed every time he took a step. The group roars. You groan, but secretly, you admire the creativity. It's not just about getting laughs. It's about finding something to control. You can't choose where you sleep, or what you eat, or whether you'll live past next week, but you can tell a story where the general trips on a chamber pot. That's yours. Laughter undercuts the fear. It cuts through the silence that creeps in after roll call when someone's name goes unspoken. It reminds you that you're still a person, not just a uniform or a statistic. You toss a twig into the fire. Sparks scatter like tiny fireflies in retreat. Across the circle, someone starts another tale, this one involving 3 cows, a banjo, and a very confused lieutenant. You settle in. This one's going to be good. Every unit has its own weird vocabulary, words and phrases no outsider would understand. You've picked up a few over the months. Corn-cobbed means humiliated shoestring. Breakfast refers to no breakfast at all, and Johnny Thump is code for a surprise Confederate raid. No one really explains where these come from. They just spread like trench lice. One day, you're confused. The next, you're saying them without thinking. It's more than just slang. It's culture. Inside jokes born from shared suffering and absurdity. You're not just a soldier. You're part of a bizarre little comedy troupe with matching outfits and questionable hygiene. Take Corporal Spud. He got the name after tripping over a sack of potatoes 3 nights in a row. Since then, every time someone stumbles, someone else yells, "Watch out for Spud." Doesn't matter who's involved. Spud's name echoes through the trees like a sacred chant. He pretends to hate it, but you catch him smiling every time. These in-jokes create boundaries. A newcomer might be welcome, but until they laugh at the right moments or use the right words, they're not in. It's a kind of emotional shorthand proof that you've been through the same mud, the same missed rations, the same absurd roll calls, where your name gets mispronounced as Turnipson. One fringe tale comes from a Tennessee regiment that referred to coffee as muddy salvation and rations as prayers with bones. A private's diary noted that a particularly grim stew was dubbed Lincoln's Revenge. It's hard to tell if these were exaggerations or desperate poetry, but they stuck. Even carved messages took on a life of their own. A piece of latrine wall was covered in charcoal drawings of General Chicken Legs, a fictional officer made of poultry who issued ridiculous commands. His motto, "March till you molt." No one admitted to drawing him, but he became the camp's unofficial mascot. Historians still debate the long-term psychological effects of this microculture. Was it a healthy outlet, a coping mechanism, or did it create emotional bubbles that delayed the breakdowns waiting just outside? Regardless, these internal dialects turned loosely connected men into tight-knit tribes. You remember when someone started calling your unit the Mud Scholars after 3 of you fell asleep face down in the same puddle. The name stuck. Now it's painted crudely on a broken crate near your fire pit. Whenever someone says it, everyone chuckles, even the new guy. And then there's the call and response chants. One man calls, "Who's got the beans?" and someone else answers, "Ask the mule, it means nothing." Or everything. It's the language of survival. Tonight the jokes come easy. Someone's drawn a ridiculous mustache on a log and named it Lieutenant Twig. A few of you salute it before heading off to bedrolls. It's stupid. But in a war where you've lost friends to dysentery and friendly fire, sometimes stupid is salvation. You lie down, smile faintly, and whisper one last inside joke to yourself, just loud enough for the stars to hear. It starts as a hum, low, shaky, almost mistaken for a breeze. Then someone else joins in, then another. Before long, there's a ragged chorus circling the fire voices, laced with mud and homesickness. No instruments, no sheet music, just the worn melodies everyone brought from different corners of the country. You recognize the tune, Lorena. It's a favorite around camp. The lyrics are about lost love and fading time, exactly the kind of thing that makes grown men stare into the fire and pretend it's just smoke in their eyes. You hum along off-key, but no one minds. Here, sincerity matters more than pitch. Singing under the stars has become one of the few consistent rituals. There's no schedule. Someone just starts. Sometimes it's a lullaby their mother used to sing. Other times, it's a bawdy tavern tune scrubbed of its dirtiest verses. Either way, it draws people in like moths to flame. Music does something strange here. It pulls the camp tight, weaving strangers into harmony, however brief. You've seen hardened sergeants close their eyes during hard times come again no more. You've heard men from rival companies trade verses like cards. Even when rations run out, the songs never do. Historians point to these musical nights as vital morale builders. Some regiments even had designated singers, men exempt from certain duties just to preserve their voices. Confederate camps, particularly those from the rural South, leaned heavily into spirituals and shape-note hymns, while Union groups favored parlor songs and folk ballads. But the emotional goal was the same: to remember they were still human. There's a fringe account of a Union unit that rewrote Home on the Range to be about lice infestations. It became such a hit that other units requested copies, leading to an unofficial camp remix culture. The lyrics were often crude, but undeniably clever. One verse rhymed rations with vibrations, referring to explosive stomach reactions after bad beans. Sometimes the songs are whispered, barely more than breath, when someone's trying not to wake the man beside him. Other times, like tonight, they rise high and full, bouncing off tree trunks and canvas, until the whole camp feels like an amphitheater made of mud and starlight. One soldier improvises a new verse to an old tune, replacing a love interest with a mule named Margaret. The rhyme is shaky at best, but the laughter it sparks is real. Even you can't help but snort when someone yells, "Margaret deserves better." The fire's low, now mostly embers and soft smoke. But the voices keep going. You lie back, hands behind your head, and let the music carry you. For a moment, it feels like the war has paused. No guns, no marching, just this fragile choir of the exhausted and hopeful. Above you, the stars pulse to the rhythm. Maybe they're singing too. You spot him sitting off to the side, back against a stump tongue, slightly poking out the corner of his mouth in concentration. He's sketching again, something crooked and oddly charming. From here, you can't quite tell if it's a caricature of the captain or a goat wearing boots, but knowing Private Lacey, it's probably both. Scrap journals and sketchbooks have quietly become part of camp life. They're not issued or expected, but they emerge like moss between stones, accidental, stubborn, and surprisingly vital. In a world ruled by orders, mud, and gunpowder, these pages are where soldiers reclaim their imaginations. Lacey uses charcoal and bits of pencil to draw everything from portraits to stick figure battle scenes complete with speech bubbles. Charge, I forgot my gun. Is this Wednesday? His sketchbook is battered, stained with soup and soot, but it's treated like treasure. Every night someone asks, "What you drawing?" And every night he answers therapy. He's not alone. You've seen others scribbling away in the corners, some writing poetry, others doodling their boots, over and over, perfecting the laces. One man in your unit folds each day's entry into a paper crane. Another tapes pressed leaves into his book with pine sap. The materials vary: pages torn from hymnals, blank backs of supply lists, anything that'll hold ink or charcoal. Historians say these journals are gold mines. Some ended up in archives, their pages filled with intimate snapshots of life at war, not just the battles, but the boredom, the absurdity, the raw emotion. There's debate about whether these creations were meant to be personal therapy or performative memory keeping for families back home. Probably both. A fringe story comes from a drummer boy who illustrated every march with a map made of tiny footprints, labeling each town with nonsense names like Mudsville or No Pants Crossing. His journal was found years later and now sits in a museum, complete with coffee stains and the corner missing, chewed off by a squirrel, allegedly. Tonight, someone leans over Lacey's shoulder and laughs. You gave Captain Tilby 2 left feet. Lacey grins. It's accurate. You all laugh, but softly, it's past bedtime, and the fire's nearly gone. A few men curl around their blankets, while others prop themselves on elbows to watch Lacey shade in a particularly dramatic mustache. These journals are more than distractions. They're anchors. In every ridiculous cartoon or rushed verse, there's a reminder that you're more than a uniform. You're still you. You pull a folded scrap from your coat. You've been jotting down sentences here and there, half a poem, some thoughts about the sky. You're not sure if it's any good, but tonight you add one more line. Even in mud, the mind still blooms. You smile at how pretentious that sounds, but you don't cross it out. The envelope has no return address. No unit, no name you recognize, just your own, scrawled across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. It's smudged and slightly damp, but still intact. You flip it over, hesitant, like it might bite. This isn't normal. Somebody loves you. Someone jokes as you carefully unfold the letter. The others lean in, a little not too close, but enough to prove they're just as curious. The letter begins with "Dear Soldier." That's it, no specifics. Just a warm, meandering note from a stranger who says they hope you're staying strong and dry. It's written in looping cursive, full of sunny platitudes and harmless gossip about a town you've never been to. The closing reads, "From someone who thinks of you each night." You glance around. Anyone else get mystery mail? A few shake their heads. One guy mutters, "You sure it's not from that mule, Margaret?" You laugh, but only to cover the flutter in your chest. Stranger letters, ones from people you've never met, are more common than you'd expect. Sometimes it's a mix-up at the post office. Sometimes it's a church group back home writing to random soldiers. And sometimes it's just pure, inexplicable luck. There's a story in your camp about a man who corresponded for a year with a woman he'd never met, only to marry her after the war. Another version claims she turned out to be his cousin. No one knows which tale is true, and honestly, both versions are equally entertaining. Historians trace these letter anomalies to overwhelmed postal routes and well-meaning adopt-a-soldier campaigns, especially in northern states. Women particularly were encouraged to send cheerful words to unnamed servicemen, hoping to lift morale. Some signed with pen names like Clara Bell or Angel in Blue. One fringe record describes a soldier receiving 10 letters from Miss Sparrow, none of which he responded to, fearing she might be a Confederate spy, or his neighbor in disguise. There's also the eerier side letters that seem too timely, too personal. One guy swore he got a note warning him not to go on a specific patrol. He faked illness that day, and sure enough, half his squad got ambushed. Guardian angel, he whispered. Or, time-traveling postmistress, someone else added. Tonight, you read the letter twice. There's something comforting in its vagueness. No pressure, no guilt. Just the warm voice of someone who wants you to feel less alone. You tuck it into your pocket, unsure whether you'll ever write back, but you keep it. That night, as the fire flickers and the sky begins to silver, you feel just a little lighter. You're not sure who wrote you, but someone out there is thinking of you. And for now, that's enough. By now, your gear is more than just equipment. It's a journal, carved in brass and wood. Every piece tells a story, not just of war, but of who you are beneath the uniform. You run your fingers over the crude letters on your rifle stock. It's your sister's name, etched when the march halted for half an hour in Virginia. Beside it, a little heart lopsided, not your best work, but heartfelt. Further down, the initials of a friend lost 2 months ago, flanked by tiny stars. Camp carving is a quiet art. Some men whittle to pass time. Others carve to remember. And a few do it like superstition, an attempt to hold on to something real when the world feels like it's unraveling. A guy, 2 tents down, carries a tin of bullets, each one scratched, with a different word, hope luck, mama win. He loads them in a specific order, swears it brings good fortune. Another guy carved nope into the bottom of his canteen and claims it keeps bad stew away. Your mess kit lid is scratched with a crude drawing of your dog Biscuit. Someone mistook it for a pig last week. You didn't correct them. Maybe Biscuit does look like a pig. These carvings aren't about skill. They're about survival. Soldiers have always marked their belongings, shields, swords, even spoons, with names and symbols. Historians note that Civil War soldiers often personalize their items as a way to reclaim control. A musket isn't just a tool of death. It becomes your talisman, your letter opener, your canvas. Some even carved poetry, short ragged verses along the wooden curves of a pipe or knife handle. A fringe example from an Illinois camp involved a man who meticulously etched an entire psalm into the handle of his toothbrush. He said it gave him clean thoughts. Then there's the love tokens. Names of sweethearts scratched into bullet casings, hearts burned into tobacco pouches, initials carved on canteens like secret code. You once saw a guy quietly sobbing while tracing the same 2 letters on his harmonica over and over like a prayer. And the objects themselves take on mythic status. Your tent mate swears his carved spoon makes food taste better. Another claims the initials on his boot sole leave messages for God with every step. Tonight, the firelight dances off a belt buckle, engraved with something small and delicate. The owner sits silently polishing it with the corner of his sleeve. No one asks what it means. They know better. You pull out your knife check, the side of your cartridge box. There's still space. You carve slowly, carefully, just a small star this time. For someone who made you laugh last week, and didn't wake up today. No one speaks. The fire pops once, and you keep carving. The fire's just embers now, orange veins running through gray ash. Most of the camp is silent, save for the occasional shuffle of a blanket or the soft rhythmic wheeze of someone already asleep. You lie there, not quite ready to close your eyes. This is the part of night that feels suspended in glass, fragile quiet, almost holy. You shift slightly, adjusting your coat under your head. It's not comfortable, but it's what you've got. Around you, figures huddle in odd shapes, curled flat fetal. There's no uniform way to sleep in war. You make it up as you go. This moment, these quiet minutes before real sleep, are when the loneliness seeps in deepest. It always waits until the jokes stop and the fire cools. You think about home, but not in big sweeping images. It's the small stuff that gets you the sound of the porch swing creaking the way Ma tucked in her apron strings, how the cat used to sleep under your chair like a judgmental footstool. You remember how your younger brother would always fall asleep mid-sentence. That thought makes you smile. Then it makes you ache. Sometimes someone talks in their sleep. A few nights ago, someone said, "Don't shoot, please." Everyone heard it. No one brought it up. Historians often describe Civil War nights as haunted silences filled with unspoken grief and mental fatigue. Officers knew better than to patrol too harshly during these hours. A reprimand for snoring could unravel a man already hanging by a thread. The darkness does strange things to your mind. You replay conversations. You revise arguments. You whisper things to no one just to hear your own voice. Some guys pretend to be asleep just to avoid talking. Others, like you, stare at the sky and imagine a world without mud or marching. There's a fringe report about a soldier who claimed he could dream letters from home, full pages, read aloud in his sleep, word for word. When others wrote them down and sent them back to the supposed sender, the letters were received with eerie accuracy. "I was going to write that one," Sister replied. You breathe deeply, slow, and deliberate. The smoke's faded, now replaced by damp earth and old leather. You pull your blanket tighter and listen not for danger, but for rhythm, the sound of sleep overtaking your unit like a slow tide. One man hums barely audible. It's a lullaby you can't place. Another lets out a tiny laugh in his sleep. You envy him. A light breeze stirs the ashes. You close your eyes finally and think of nothing. Or try to. You don't need to speak. Not tonight. There's a kind of communication that rises in the stillness where words would only clutter things. A glance, a hand on a shoulder, a shared piece of bread, all of it says more than paragraphs could manage. Around here, silence doesn't mean distance. It means understanding. Earlier today, you helped Jenkins haul water even though it wasn't your turn. You didn't say why. He didn't ask. He just nodded once, and that was the whole conversation. You were both tired. You both knew what it meant. The silent bond, as some have come to call it, is forged not in battle, but in the long stretches between, in shared chores, mirrored habits, and mutual glances across campfires. You know who snores, who twitches in sleep, who always takes the corner closest to the fire, and who gives up their biscuit without a word when someone's had a rough day. There's a rhythm to it now. You hand off a blanket without being asked. Someone leaves a sliver of sugar in your cup without comment. It's a quiet choreography developed over months of living on top of one another in the worst conditions imaginable. Historians have noted that camaraderie in Civil War units was often less about deep friendship and more about a practiced mutual care, a kind of brotherhood built from necessity, not sentimentality. And yet, it often ran deeper than any blood tie. There's a fringe account of two soldiers who couldn't speak the same language, one from rural Bavaria, the other from backwoods Kentucky, but who were said to be closer than most married couples. They apparently communicated in grunts, gestures, and the occasional shared loaf of bread. When one was killed, the other didn't speak for 3 days. You remember a moment earlier this week. You'd been quiet all day, head full of fog, and hadn't eaten. Without a word, Henderson slid his full plate toward you and walked off. You nodded. He never even looked back. This bond isn't warm and fuzzy. It's functional, steel-threaded, and built from long hours and terrible coffee. But when the bullets start flying, it's what keeps you upright. Not patriotism, not orders, not even fear. It's knowing that someone next to you will risk their skin because you once shared a blanket when they were feverish. Tonight the fire's dead and the moon's hiding. But you feel someone settle beside you back to back. They don't speak. They don't have to. It's just a gesture, a promise. I'm here. You're not alone. You exhale and let the silence carry it all. It's a tiny square of paper folded neatly like a prayer and tucked deep into your coat pocket. You didn't expect it. You'd stopped expecting it weeks ago. When the mail arrived this morning, you weren't even paying attention. It wasn't until someone called your name twice, because you didn't believe it the first time, that you turned and took the envelope, hands already shaking. Now, with the fire dying and most of the camp asleep, you unfold it carefully under the dim glow of embers. It's a reply. From home. Just 6 lines. Slanted handwriting. A quick update. A short line about the harvest. And at the end, we miss you terribly. Stay warm. Write when you can. That's it. And it's everything. You read it again slower. Each word feels like a gulp of fresh water after days in the sun. You imagine the hands that wrote it, the table, the room. The cat probably knocked over the inkwell again. You can almost hear your sister cursing under her breath, blotting it up with her apron. It's not poetic. It's not long. But it's proof. Proof that someone out there still holds a space for you in their world. A space with your name on it, scribbled in familiar ink. For many soldiers, replies were rare. Postal systems were delayed, unreliable, or lost altogether. Some letters took months to arrive, often too late. Sometimes they came after the sender had passed away. Historians note that a reply, no matter how brief, had a measurable impact on morale. A soldier with a fresh letter slept better, smiled more, and some claimed marched longer without complaint. There's a fringe account of a soldier who made a charm from his favorite line in a reply. He cut it from the letter and sealed it in a walnut shell, carrying it in his pocket like a talisman. When he died, it was still there, worn soft but intact. You fold your letter carefully, tucking it back inside your coat close to your chest. You don't need to show it off. The others understand. A few have letters tucked under their heads right now, crumpled from rereading, still warm from being held. One man across the fire sees you fold the page. He doesn't ask. He just gives a slow nod. You nod back. And for the first time in weeks, your pulse slows as you drift towards sleep, your name still echoing in someone else's handwriting. The war didn't stop today, but you made it through. And maybe that's enough. As you lie beneath the thinning army blanket, your back pressed into packed earth, and your face tilted toward a sky full of unbothered stars, something strange happens. You begin to feel okay. Not joyful, not peaceful, but grounded, carried even by something invisible and stubbornly kind. You think about the stories shared tonight, the laughter, The drawings, the carved initials, the voice that broke mid-song. You think about that brief glance from a comrade, the press of shoulders in sleep, the silence that said, "I've got you." It's easy to forget from a distance that war is built not just on battles, but on bonds. That survival isn't just muscle and gunpowder, it's memory affection, even sarcasm. You didn't win anything today. You didn't move any lines on a map. But you laughed. You listened. You remembered home without falling apart. That's victory enough. Historians will write about troop movements and casualty rates. They'll argue over tactics and politics. But they'll miss this, the invisible thread that loops around every man in this camp and holds him up when the marching stops. The joke about the mule named Margaret, the song sung off-key, the silence shared before dawn. A fringed letter once described war as a heartbreak with boots. The soldier who wrote that never made it home. But tonight, those words hum softly in your mind, and somehow they feel right. So you breathe deeply. You roll onto your side. You curl around your letter, your thoughts, your half-finished poem, and you let go. Because here in the glow of ash and memory, you are not alone. You are held by laughter, by longing, by the tangled knot of lives that dared to feel in the middle of chaos. And that might just be enough to carry you through tomorrow. Let yourself drift now. The fire has cooled to a soft shimmer. No more crackles, just a warm pulse beneath the ash. The last voices have faded, replaced by breath, steady and slow. One man stirs in his sleep, adjusting his blanket, then stills again. Somewhere, a cricket chirps. Even the war seems to pause. You stretch your legs slowly. The earth beneath you is uneven, but familiar. You've memorized its shape. The air is cooler now, wrapping you like a second blanket. Not harsh, just present. Your eyes flutter. You let them close. Think of the hands that wrote you. Think of the voices that sang beside you. Think of the old tin cup passed around the fire. Nothing perfect, nothing grand. Just proof that you were here. That you felt things deeply. That even in the ugliest places, you carved something beautiful into the dark. Let your breath soften. Let your muscles melt into the earth. Tonight, there are no marches, no orders, just quiet, just stars, and the promise that someone somewhere still waits for your reply. Before you close this chapter tonight, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this journey stayed with you the most? Drop a comment, hit subscribe if you haven't, and share this with someone who needs a quiet moment by the fire. Now, sleep well